Second grade gets more streamlined. We have the nonsense word fluency, and that make it early on to pick up those kids who might not have well-established alphabetic principle, phonics type things going on, so we're going to check that out. And then pretty much we just have reading fluency, and I'm going to show you that now. So again, they have this passage. Again, the passage is longer than they need, and that's kind of the neat part. And over here, that's for your scoring. On their passage, they don't have the numbers. Now, the fun thing about this is, because I was part of the assessment of these kids, at the end of the year, I would have kids making comments like, so that's what happened to, because with the benchmarking, you administer, this is the only test that you administer the same one 3 times. So this passage, you would see this passage in September, January, and May. And as they got through, it was kind of rewarding to hear these kids remembering from the other passages, I wondered what happened to that, da-da-da. The other thing that happens is, I had a youngster who had a deficit in reading, and when it came time to do the assessment, when it was all over, he said, what was my score? I said, well, I really don't have time to score it. I'm doing the whole class. He said, you got to tell me. I'm shooting for 101. If I get 101, that's my goal. So his teacher had set up, he was being progress monitored, and he had been working on his graph with his teacher, and if he got 101 today, he'd met his goal. And he actually got something like 105. He was like walking on air. So the whole point being that including these kids in this process as well is highly motivating. So what happens here is that with reading fluency in this model, they read 3 different passages in the sitting. So it's 1 minute each, so it takes 3 minutes. And then you take the median score. You throw out the high score, you throw out the low score, and you keep the middle. And usually what happens is the first passage, kids are just getting warmed up. Second passage, a little better. Third passage. And then so the middle one is the one you enter and you use for your data.
So when you're doing this, if a child misses a word, are you circling? Are you finding out why they missed it?
Good point. No. This is purely assessment. So if a child is missing a word, I'm marking that word. And here's why, we're going to get into it in a minute. Here's why it's important for the teacher to eventually do this, which they do, and not me. Here's what would happen. I would show up at the school. They would put me in a room at 8:30 in the morning, and kids would start filing through all day, me listening to them reading these passages as part of the support I was giving the schools. Well, the first 20 kids would have all sorts of little notes on the passage to the teacher about what I noticed while they were reading. Some things to them be alert at. What do you think about the last 20 kids at 2 o'clock? No way. So,
because when we do these tests, for every mistake, you have to find out if it's meaning, visual, or syntax.
Yeah. This is the good point. Now, if you're the classroom teacher and you can draw some inferences while it's happening, you certainly jot those down. But for this here, this is not diagnostic. That's an excellent point. These tests are not diagnostic in nature, except what you draw from it from your professional experience sitting across while administering them. And that's a huge and important point, because if someone tanks on these reading fluency, we need to now find out why. And that's where the kind of assessment you're talking about. Let me digress for a minute. I was working with a supervisory union, which is 6 towns that each one is too small to have their own middle and high school, so they gang together. So they have 6 elementary schools, middle school, and a high school. And I met with their assistant superintendent for curriculum development, and I said, let me look at your assessment portfolio. What do you do with kids? And they do this assessment where the teacher sits down and does what you're doing. They do some reading samples, and it takes 45 minutes per student to do this. And it's highly diagnostic in value. So when I started looking at the scores, in a classroom of 20, 16, and it has a rating of 1, 2, 3, or 4. 3 or 4 meaning you're cool, 1 or 2, we should be interested. On average, of all these classrooms across all these schools, 16 of 20 kids would get a 3 or a 4. That's a huge amount of time invested in an assessment that really isn't going to go anywhere because this youngster is doing fine. So now what's happening is they're doing the reading fluency measure, and kids who are at risk on that then get the kind of assessment you're talking about, and then get this other assessment that's in this school that takes 45 minutes or more, because you need that data to inform what are we going to do. It's one thing to know that the youngster does poorly on an indicator of general reading. It's another thing to know why, and that's where the other piece cuts in. So you see that demarcation. These are not diagnostic in terms of where the problem lies. They're diagnostic in terms of identifying who's having a problem and who's at risk. They also are very reliable in telling us if what we're doing to remediate that risk is making a difference. And we're going to look at that in a bit. So does that respond to your question?